Hello everyone, and thank you for attending our webinar, Detect Advanced Threats with Machine Learning. I am your host, Mindy Stubbs, Demand Generation Coordinator here at Optiv. Before we get started, a few quick notes. First, this webinar is recorded and available for on-demand viewing. Let me take a quick moment to introduce our speakers. Here with me today, we have Brian Drexler and Ron Kent. Brian Drexler is a 25-year IT veteran with expertise in security and networking solutions. Having started his career as a consultant with Capgemini, Brian has been able to leverage that business-first approach to solving client issues. He has been focused on information security for a number of years, currently serving as a solutions architect at Optiv Security. Ron Kent is a National Technical Specialist for Aruba Introspect solution and is based in Dallas, Texas. Ron has over 25 years in the IT industry. Before his time at HP Aruba, he spent almost a decade at RSA helping customers hunt down the forces of evil with SIEM and full packet capture solutions. When he isn't tracking down the bad guys in the digital world, Ron enjoys spending his time with his wife and family and also riding motorcycles in the Texas Hill Country. Now let's get things started. I will hand it over to Brian.
Thank you, Mindy. And hey, hello, Ron. Thanks for doing this. As I'm sure you can imagine, being in the space, this whole, what is UEBA? Is it a standalone product? Does it work with other tools? And essentially, as that second question is put right there, is it going to help me? I need efficiencies. I have limited people, so help me understand this. Why do I want UEBA? What's it going to do for me?
Okay, and you're certainly asking the right questions, which is, what is it going to do for me and my SOC? So let's take that into two parts. And first of all, good morning to you too. It's a bit of a brisk morning down here in Dallas today, but typically what you'd expect in December. So first point is, what is UEBA and how does it fit into my security program? For those that don't know what UEBA is, it's User and Entity Behavioral Analytics. And Aruba Introspect specifically, and also be known as Niara. So those of you that hear me say Niara or Introspect, just know that they're one and the same. But what it's designed to do is it's designed to find things that are happening on the inside of your network. We already assume a customer already has a SIM. They already have maybe an IDS, a firewall, endpoint solutions, and a whole host of other security tools in their stack. This is that line of defense for monitoring legitimate users and devices on the network and making sure that their behavior is consistent with their historical behavior, but also that of their peers. The other thing that it does is it helps the security teams be more efficient when they have to do a forensic investigation. If you look at some of the recent breaches and also the Verizon data breach report, you know that not only does it take a long time just to discover a breach, but it also takes a long time to piece together forensically what happens. So what we've done is we built some tools that enable the SOC analyst to piece together what exactly happens during that potential event or breach, involve the right stakeholders, and then follow up very, very quickly so that that attacker's dwell time is kept to a minimum. Now, I will also mention that designed and, really how does it fit into my existing security program? We're assuming that you already have a whole suite of tools already in the system. So we built connectors to be able to collect data from your existing security stack, whether it's your SIM today or your DLP solution or something like a Carbon Black or a Tanium. Plus we do things like integrate in threat intelligence feeds so that we find the known bads that are happening inside of your network. We take that, we marry that with data that's coming from the network through layer 4 through layer 7 deep packet inspection. So you may already be doing deep packet inspection today with a DLP solution or with your IDS or with another type of tool. So we can plug into your existing infrastructure pretty easily in order to do behavioral analytics. The other thing that we can really help do, and this is more specifically geared to Aruba customers or potential Aruba customers, is we do plug into the existing Aruba infrastructure very nicely also. As you might imagine, after the acquisition back last year, one of the first things that we did with the product was integrated into the ClearPass network access control solution. And what that does, historically these solutions have been passive. The UEBA solution tells you that something is going on the network. Ron Kent is transferring data to a foreign country at 3 a.m. on a Saturday and he doesn't normally do it. And then you're responsible for taking action on that and making sure that Ron Kent doesn't do anything else on the network. Well, now with the integration into the ClearPass infrastructure, we can take action on that automatically, either at 3 a.m. when that happens and that behavior drives a risk score that exceeds some sort of threshold, or it can be done at the discretion of the analyst. And that could be as simple as taking the device off the network, quarantining the user, forcing the user to re-authenticate, or any number of policy-based actions. So it really fits into your infrastructure nicely for network access control, but also gives you the ability to interrupt things earlier in the kill chain before one infected machine or user becomes 1,000. So let's take a quick look at the second question here, which is, does it improve my SOC operations? And that's always a great question to ask a software vendor is what does it do for me? How does it help? And can you actually quantify it? And a really interesting point to note here is that we did a study with one of our customers. And what you're seeing on the screen now are the typical steps that you have to go through in order to investigate an alert. And a lot of these are common across different types of attacks and solutions, which is, well, first of all, I probably start with some sort of IP address that's coming from my SIM or my IDS. I've got to go tie that to a user. That takes time. I've got to go find out every other device that was involved with it. I look to see, is that normal for that user or compared to their peers? What did they do yesterday, a week ago, a month ago, and so on. And then finally, I've got to consolidate all that down into one digestible format and involve the right stakeholders. All that adds up to a lot of time. With Introspect, we do all of that automatically into one mouse click, and we call that our Entity 360. That does everything that you see there on the left, combines it into one step, and so that also you don't miss anything there. You don't miss that laptop or that iPad that was brought in by the user and that was used as part of that campaign. And this really adds up to a lot of savings. So to answer the question, what does it do for my SOC? One is it's going to help give back some time to your SOC analyst. There's no magic bullets out there. And I get this question a lot also, which is, well, does it replace the person in the SOC? And no, it does not. What it does is it functions as a force multiplier that helps them become more productive with their time and focus on the things of highest importance. A good analogy to that, if you ever go to Walmart, and come on, admit it, you go to Walmart, we all do, you notice in the self-checkout line that there's probably 6 or 7, maybe more self-checkout registers there, but there's always a person that's overseeing it to make sure that things are running smoothly and to handle any exceptions or problems. And that's very similar to what we do with Introspect. We're multiplying the efforts of the SOC analyst, but we by no means replace the SOC analyst. Just a couple of other metrics just to show you the magnitude of what we do. And these are actual numbers. So what you're seeing on the screen right now, this was a recent 60-day POC that we did with a customer in Texas, just to show you how much time we do save. And through our deep packet inspection on the network, we looked at over 2.4 billion network conversations in the course of 60 days, over 100 million Active Directory events. Those distilled down to lots of lower level signals, but only 17 high priority alerts and 6 investigations. Now why is that? Well, we do a couple of things with all of that network traffic. So we correlate the data together. We look across the kill chain to see an infection level event followed by a command and control, followed by exfiltration. All of that has an impact on what we call our risk score. And that risk score is really what drives the SOC analyst, not another screen of alerts. They probably already have too many screens of alerts already to manage, but that risk score is really what drives the analyst to take action. And in this case, we only had 6 high-risk items. So that's a lot of potential work that was saved through doing that event correlation and doing it automatically with supervised and unsupervised machine learning. So a lot of benefits for the SOC. All right, Brian?
Yeah, great. That helps out, Ron. Thank you. So you mentioned several security platforms, firewalls and such, other bits like domain controllers, maybe DHCP, et cetera, these things that would enable an effective solution. So what do I need to send to Introspect and why? And what if I'm missing one of the recommended components? Is it all or nothing? Or can you phase in data sources over time, improving the visibility as we start getting smarter based on what we start with phase one? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And that really highlights the fact that every customer's environment is different. I run into some customers that have had a SIM for a number of years. It may be Splunk, it may be QRadar or ArcSight, but then again, I run into customers that even in 2018 don't have a SIM. So the solution really has to be flexible and malleable enough to deal with whatever a customer is going to throw at it, but also we have to be flexible enough to use whatever is at hand and extract the maximum value for it. So there's really only 3 things that a customer needs to do behavioral analytics, and you can do 99% of what our product, Introspect, can do if you have these 3 things. And you see I'm going to kind of bullet these out over on the right-hand side of the screen. The first is network traffic. So we depend a lot, as you can also imagine, being part of Aruba, we know a little bit about the network. So we look at network traffic, both north-south and east-west traffic inside of a customer's network. And that's layer 4 through layer 7 deep packet inspection. That's our first priority. If you can give us a span, a tap, a port mirror, if you have an Ixia or a Gigamon or another network packet broker, we can take a feed right off of those systems. And you don't have to give us any firewall logs, proxy logs, or even DNS logs. We can get everything that we need off the wire. It's pretty easy to do. That's the first thing that you need. The second thing is Active Directory logs. So this is the second part of the picture, and not everything can be sensed off the network. A good example of that are failed authentications. You can't see a failed authentication from the network. You can't see a privilege escalation, somebody being moved into a domain admin group. But you can see that from Active Directory logs, and those are important steps in the kill chain to be able to monitor and to link to other activities. And in some cases can be precursors to things that are happening in the network. Good example of that. I was with a large school district, and one of the first things that Introspect detected was a series of failed logins and lockouts on one of the high school's administrators' laptops. It ended up being an Emotet infection that we were able to contain very, very quickly. But the very first inclination that something was going on were those failed authentications, and that's only through Active Directory connections that we can get that data and do those analytics. So the third and the last important thing that you need in order to deploy this is an LDAP connection. And the reason that we need that is so that we can download the user and the group structure into our machine learning analytics. So you probably heard me mention earlier, we do both historical baselines and also peer baselines. So that means that my behavior compared to what I did a day ago, a week ago, a month ago, and looking to see if that matches historical norms. But also my behavior compared to everyone else on the technical team or whatever members are in my Active Directory groups. That way I can find those true outliers as they compare to other folks on the team. Now that's really important too, and that's really a good question everyone should ask a machine learning vendor is well, how do you know you're not learning bad behavior? If you're learning historical behavior, there's no guarantee that you're not learning a user that's already been compromised or gone rogue or a device that's already been infected. But with peer analytics, you're able to find those true outliers. It would be pretty rare to find every single camera that's around your building infected with malware or every user in your domain admins group that's been compromised. So that's a great way to do that. To do that, though, we do need to have a connection back to your Active Directory via LDAP. So those are the 3 things that you absolutely need. Now, I also recognize that, especially for point number 1, not everybody can tap their whole network. Or they can tap their ingress-egress traffic, but they can't get 40 to 80 gig worth of taps on 10 different remote locations. And that's not a problem at all. We can take in other types of data, whether it be firewall logs, proxy logs, NetFlow data, whatever else can give us network telemetry in order to give us additional details on what's happening on the network. And you'll get our full analytics suite with that. The only thing that you'll be missing is if you go in to do forensics and you start to try to delve down into the packet level for obvious reasons there. But you can start with those 3 data sources. The more that you add on, the smarter machine learning gets. So if you have an endpoint solution or a DLP solution, you can feed us those events either at the beginning or later on as you start to deploy those. And those will give us even more signals for us to get more accurate risk scores. And the same goes for the rest of your infrastructure, for your existing alerts that come from your SIM, and other tools that you may bring on at a later date.
Got it. Yeah, that helps out. So I'm seeing a good number of the UEBA solutions being added to larger portfolios, like you mentioned earlier, Niara becoming Introspect, part of the Aruba stack. But to me, it seems like some of the standalone UEBAs, they're looking to rebrand as a next-gen SIM, even a replacement of the SIM. Now, your previous slide showed those traditional SIM players sitting between data sources and the analysis engine, Introspect. So I'm guessing I might know the answer to this, but do you see it this way? Is UEBA next-gen SIM? Can we drop it in favor of UEBA?
And that really depends upon the use cases for the customer. So for the customers that have traditional SIM use cases, and I spent a lot of time in my previous role as a SIM specialist there, so I'm pretty familiar with the use cases. But some of the real core drivers, compliance reports, PCI Section 10, SOX reports, HIPAA reports, also just general log management. In other words, I've got a large repository where I need to dump everything, no matter what, no matter how important it is. Those SIM use cases, we don't touch those at all with Introspect. We laser focus on behavioral analytics and making sure that customers can find things that have bypassed traditional defenses. Now, granted, there are a lot of spending dollars for SIM use cases, and there are a lot of vendors out there that are purporting next-gen SIM and going after that business. But for us, we really want to focus. We want to be able to find those things that can prevent the customer from getting on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, rather than just chasing those opportunities where it's just compliance reports or general log management. That also gives us the ability to drop into a customer's existing infrastructure with a very light impact to them. They don't have to replace their SIM. If you have Splunk, great. If you have QRadar, great. If you have ArcSight, perfect. We can plug into those SIMs today, take the existing feeds from those, and then utilize those to do behavioral analytics, rather than coming in with a forklift upgrade to completely replace their entire SIM, which if you're going to replace your SIM today, that is an enormous operation. And customers really need to understand that if they're going to replace their SIM with a next-gen SIM.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, again, it always goes back to what are the specific use cases, so understanding the business drivers and making sure that we approach accordingly. So I think, and I'm wondering, would you be able to show us what Introspect actually does when it detects unusual behavior? What would the analysts see? Help them start interfacing with the system? You good for a demo break?
Sure, absolutely. I'm a technical guy, so I'm always good for a demo. All right, so let me see if I can share my desktop.
All right, so I'll just take this through just a quick 5-minute demo, just to give everybody an idea of what happens when you do detect unusual behavior. So just to set this up, on the back end, what's happening is Introspect is constantly looking at the network traffic that's flying across the network. It's looking at log events from Active Directory. It's looking for events coming from your existing infrastructure, and using supervised and unsupervised machine learning in order to roll up a risk score that you use to manage all of the exceptions that are happening in your environment. Now, if the system is set up correctly, you really don't have to do anything but wait for Introspect to give you a signal. You don't have to stare at a console all day. You don't have another screen of alerts that you have to manage. You simply wait for it to either tell you with an email or to send a signal to your SIM or another console that there's some sort of issue that needs to be addressed. And that could either be a user or a device's risk score that's gone beyond a certain threshold. Our risk scoring goes from 1 to 100, with 100 being the highest. Or it could also be a severe alert. A detected ransomware IOC that's flying across the network may cause an alert to be fired also. So there are some high severity alerts that may cause you to be notified. Now, the great thing is that we try to keep your eyes off the glass as much as possible until it's absolutely necessary, because we know that the SOC analyst today has quite enough to do as it is with their existing tool set. Well, how do you do this once something does happen? What does a day in the life typically look at? And if you're looking at my screen right now, you'll see that this is our main dashboard. This gives me a good state of the union on what my highest risk users and devices are in the network. You can see up here at the top, I've got all of my high risk users, hosts, and IP address in the network, plus I have a series of watch lists to where I can keep track of some of the more important things in my organization. Maybe a list of my critical assets, all of my devices that are in scope for PCI, or maybe my executive team or users that are under investigation if I want to take more of a user-based approach to the watch list. And as you see here on the left, I have all of my top risk users and sorted in descending order. So it's pretty easy for me to understand, high risk is where I need to start. And this very top one here that says Michelle Johnson, her risk score is at 100. I can click on that and go into what we call that Entity 360 that you saw from a few slides previously. This Entity 360, as the name implies, is everything that we know about the user. And this is from event correlation, from Active Directory, from the network, from the ClearPass and the Aruba infrastructure, and from your SIM, and anything else that you can feed us data about will consolidate onto this window and correlate. So you'll see up here at the top, you have Michelle Johnson. We see that she's a member of the finance department. So this is where that LDAP connection really comes into play, because now I can know who this person is. Are they a privileged user? Are they a member of a domain admin group, or simply just a domain user? What watch list have they been placed on? And as I scroll down a little further, you'll see how that risk score goes up and down over time. So immediately this gives me some context on what's happening and why you may have gotten a notification that this user's behavior looks abnormal. You see that everybody starts out as 0 with their risk. Same thing with devices. We handle devices the exact same way. And you can see that this risk score goes up and it goes down over time depending upon the behavior that we see. And all of the more strong signals, so anything with a severity of greater than 60, gets plotted down at the bottom, mapped to the stage of the cyber kill chain, so infection through exfiltration stage. So it will tell me, really at a glance, are we at the beginning stages of some sort of attack, outbreak, APT, or compromised user, where we're seeing infection level and command and control, or are we more at the latter stages where we're starting to see lateral movement and exfiltration and data leave the building. So this tells me a lot in here on what's happening, but I can also drill down into certain parts of it to find more details about what's going on. As an example, with this first command and control activity that we see is some suspicious looking DNS traffic that's coming from the user's workstation. And this is all detected with unsupervised machine learning. So these are pre-trained algorithms that look for hidden patterns in the data. It doesn't use signatures, it doesn't use rules or coding or anything else in order to do it, but it uses a pre-trained machine learning algorithm that's been trained with millions of labeled good and bad examples to detect that this looks like suspicious DNS traffic. A little later in the kill chain, you'll also see that we've got some a host scan that's happened on the network, and a privilege escalation. And this privilege escalation really speaks to the fact that we utilize Active Directory logs in addition to network traffic so that we can see things like people being moved into administrative groups. We can see those privilege escalations happen in context with other network activity also. Finally, at the end, you'll see that, and really the straw that broke the camel's back and caused that risk score to go way high was this large data upload to an external website. And the question I always ask is well, what is a large amount of data? How much is that? Is that a kilobyte? Is that a megabyte? Is that a terabyte? And really the answer is that it varies. It varies depending upon the user. It varies depending upon the time of the day of the week, the group that they're a member of, and so on. And unsupervised machine learning, which is what we're using here, learns that behavior and that periodicity of the data over time. So it learns that right now, 69.74 gig worth of traffic is a large amount of data for historical behavior. And I could even click on this history baseline to see what baseline was exceeded. And in this case, it was a daily baseline. You see that 0 bytes were typically sent outside of the network on the days prior. And then all of a sudden, we saw a lot of data that was going outside of the network. Now, of course, the next question you may ask is, well, where did it go and what was sent? Well, if I click on this link up here at the top, this will tell me that over 69 gig went to Russia. It was with the HTTP application. And I can even go over here to my network conversations, see each individual HTTP conversation. And if you're doing SSL decryption, we'll show you everything from the HTTP headers, the request and response, any files that were transferred, a lot of low-level data that can help you forensically, and things that would be invisible to other just file or NetFlow-based solutions. But you have all of these forensics here at your fingertips if you need them. So that's typically what happens when you detect unusual behavior, and that could be for a user or for a device. In this case, I showed you a user, but it could just as easily be we detected a camera sending data outside of the network that doesn't normally send camera data outside of the network. Now, what else do I do in here? Okay, this is great that it tells me that something's going on, but speed to remediation is key for this and reducing any kind of dwell time. What we can do immediately is I can go over here to Actions, and I can quarantine this user. So this works with our ClearPass NAC to find every single device that this user is logged in to the network with, and I can immediately quarantine this user or execute some other type of policy-based action. That could be force them to re-authenticate, or use a two-factor token, or drop them into the guest VLAN, or any number of other types of actions. But the idea here is that you can take quick action. It's done at the discretion of the security analyst, but it can also be done on your behalf automatically. So if this happens at 3 a.m., we can immediately quarantine this user or wall them off from the critical assets until the SOC comes in the morning and is able to take care of it. So that's just a quick tour of how we handle unusual behavior. Now there's many other things that you can do in here, and we'll get into some of that as we go through the rest of the demonstration later in the webcast.
All right, so just to recap there what you saw Introspect detecting some unusual activity from an individual user, but also correlating that to things that happened previously so that we can help reduce false positives, but also help you focus on the things that truly need attention. And then finally, what this slide illustrates is that whole policy-based action that you can take when something does happen. So this user being quarantined as a result of it, either automatically or at the discretion of the security analyst. So Introspect provides a complete round-trip solution in order to handle those unusual behaviors. Not just another screen that tells you that something needs to be done, and it's up to you to go figure out what that is.
All right, Ron, so I just picked up on it. You said false positives. So here it is. False positives, they're a killer, especially when they come from a solution that claims to improve SOC efficiency. So the challenge here is everyone seems to say the same thing. We reduce your false positives. And I'm guessing Introspect is no different on the marketing side. So can you explain how you deal with false positives from more of a technical perspective?
Yes, and you're right. It absolutely is a challenge for customers. And if you look at some of the breaches that are out there, a lot of those true signals were hidden in plain sight, which is really a shame because I think on the detection side, we've made great strides in the last 5 to 10 years. But trying to separate the wheat from the chaff has been pretty difficult for most tools. So let me walk you through a couple of things that we do to help address that problem. So part of our founders came from a SIM background, so we really understood this problem innately. The way that we addressed it first of all is, well, how do we improve the sensing part and the sense-making part of what we do? So we applied data science to this problem. In fact, we hired a number of PhDs to help us build this risk scoring algorithm to where before it even gets to the attention of the security analyst, how do we make sure that it really is a legitimate signal? How do we look across the kill chain, the frequency, the recency, the periodicity of the events, and how do we use machine learning rather than rules in order to do it? In the past, we'd create rules to say, look for 5 failed logins followed by a successful login coming from an IP address outside with the VPN concentrator, or something like that. But what happens when it's 4 failed logins or 6 failed logins and so on? You can't really put a stake in the ground to do that, but machine learning is really good at finding those behavioral changes, even if they're not quite obvious to the naked eye. And we use a combination of supervised and unsupervised machine learning. And for those of you that aren't familiar with what those are, unsupervised machine learning is nothing more than on-the-job training for a machine learning algorithm. It doesn't know what's good or bad. All it knows is that it normally sees Ron Kent log in from 8 to 5, well, roughly every day, depending on traffic. And he accesses data in this handful of servers with these ports, protocols, and he accesses this handful of cloud-based services. Unsupervised machine learning helps us to cluster those activities so that we can find anomalies in those. So as you might guess, it gets smarter over time and learns the more data that you give it. We also have supervised machine learning algorithms, and those are pre-trained. As we discussed on a previous slide, they've been pre-trained with labeled examples. So they still learn from data, but they learn in the lab from examples that have been labeled, DNS DGA, DNS exfiltration, DNS tunneling request, and of course normal DNS request. That way it can find hidden patterns to detect things. By combining all of those signals together mathematically, we're able to come up with this risk score to where if you get something that's a high risk, 80 to 90 to 100, you have a pretty good confidence that this is something that you need to respond to. So this is the first part of reducing false positives, is just on the front end in making sure that your signals are good. The second part is well, there's no magic bullets out there. Inevitably, it's going to find things that are anomalous, but not necessarily malicious. So take that example of me sending data to Russia at 3 a.m. on a Saturday. That may be anomalous. I may not have done that before, but it may not be malicious because the system doesn't know that we're standing up an office in Moscow and I'm sending a bunch of VMs for the next 2 weeks or a month to that location. So it just sees it as anomalous, it sees it and flags it and then sends it up for analysis by the SOC analyst. So what we've done is we built a feedback mechanism into the system too, so that when those inevitable exceptions happen, you can mark those just with a simple mouse click. So it's really pretty easy. You can go in and you can, with a mouse click, tell it that, hey, this is a true positive or a false positive or an exception. You can even put conditions on it too to say that this is an exception. It's okay for Ron Kent to upload data to Moscow, but only for the next 2 weeks, and only for Russia and not Romania or Bulgaria or any other list of countries. So I can get very, very specific with it on here. That's the second key to this, being able to give that feedback loop to it. So what I'd like now is give you just a quick demonstration on it. It's one thing to talk about it. It's another to show you how this is going to work in practice. Because good news is you don't have to know any kind of coding, scripting, Python, TensorFlow. You don't even have to be a data scientist to understand how to tune the machine learning analytics when it does find exceptions.
Okay, so let's run through a quick example of an exception that was found by the system and how do you mark it as an exception or a false positive. So back to that example of Michelle Johnson where she was uploading data to a new country or had a large data upload to an external website. What if it is legitimate? Yes, it is anomalous. She didn't do it before. As you look at the baseline here, she didn't upload anything before in the past 30 days. But it is legitimate since we are opening up an office in Moscow. Well, one thing that I can do immediately is I can go here and I can just simply mark this as an exception. That's all that I need to do to train that machine learning algorithm that something is an exception, and is not anomalous. And that'll prevent that alert from firing in the future for Michelle Johnson. Now I can get very granular with it also. So if I go into my investigative console here, you'll see that not only do I have the ability to mark an exception, but I can also modify the use case so that I can get very specific with it. Because maybe it is Michelle, but maybe it's someone else too. Maybe it's Michelle, maybe it's Ron, maybe it's Brian, and maybe it's for Russia, and it's for China, and for other countries that are out there. So I can get very specific with this, either with a basic editor or with an advanced editor to where I can add a custom query to where I can specify the exact conditions to where this alert is squelched in the future. And this is really, really important for also making sure that you don't generate a lot of false negatives out there either, because I can't think of anything worse than a false negative. A false positive is one thing, but a false negative could mean that something is getting through that shouldn't be, and nobody knows about it. It's completely invisible. So this use case editor enables you to do that. And you can also mark these exceptions and mark them as being time-bound. So if it's only okay for the next week, 2 weeks, a month, or however long, you can specify that when you go into that exception to create it, so that you can make sure that after that action is done, that any subsequent activities to Russia are going to be flagged as anomalous if the system has seen it as anomalous. Now, how do I manage these exceptions? Because over time, you might have a lot of these. If you're a busy organization, a multinational organization, you might have a lot of these to deal with at some point. So what I can do is I can move over to my analytics and rules list, and this will show me a consolidated list of every single built-in analytic. And there's over 140 different analytics that are built into the system. I won't go into it in this part of the demo here, but just know that there's a lot of these that are built in that are based on machine learning and also some discrete analytics. But what this also does is show me everywhere where I've marked a false positive, a true positive, or an exception. So nothing's going to fall through the cracks. You can regularly review this list and to make sure that your current assumptions are true on exceptions that are happened. So this is a great way on how we handle false positives. And once more, you don't have to be a data scientist to understand this. You don't have to know anything about the underlying machine learning algorithms. You can just simply point and click and tell it when it's found something that's anomalous but not malicious.
All right, very nice, Ron. Hey, before the demo, you said something that really caught my attention, the sense-making part of Introspect. I really like that, so I'd like to follow up on that in the near future. But moving on, quite a bit of our conversation has been around users, their unusual behavior. So maybe that malware that infected Michelle Johnson, it moved to a server, then launched activity from there, not really from Michelle's systems. So what happens if a server is compromised? It's doing something without a user associated with that activity, or actually, as we're seeing now, just an explosion of IoT devices throughout our environments. Do you guys deal with that? Can you, that LDAP integration, et cetera? We got stuff that just doesn't have a user. So help me understand how you deal with that.
Yeah, and you're right. And this has become an enormous challenge for customers today. In fact, I do everything from proof of concepts to production deployments with Introspect, and part of our scoping process is understanding just how many users and devices they have in their network. And when it comes to enumerating how many IoT devices are in the network or headless devices, I've only had one customer that knew that number. So it's a huge blind spot for most customers. And if you don't know what they are, how do you even know what they're doing? And if what they're doing is suspicious or not. If you look on this next slide, and this slide is really tongue-in-cheek, but it's no laughing matter because if you remember from a year or so ago, there was a casino where through a thermometer in the fish tank in the lobby, they were able to get in and out of the network. That was a real wake-up call for the industry because it's not just about those servers in the rack. It's not just about the users that have an Active Directory account. It's also those small little devices, the toaster in the break room, the thermometers, even the light bulbs now that have their own IP address. It's pretty amazing what we've been able to do. I mean, from a control perspective, You know, the fact that I have an app now to where I can control the temperature in my house is just amazingly cool. But it's also amazingly vulnerable, and you've got to be managing and looking at what's happening there. Thankfully, with Introspect, we treat devices very similar to how we treat users. Obviously, they do not have an LDAP account, and that's not a problem at all. We look at host names, we look at IP addresses, we do unsupervised machine learning, and also peer-based analytics on those devices just the same. And if you're using something like the ClearPass network access control device, it'll even give us things like the categories of the devices. Is it a laptop? Is it a mobile device? Is it a camera? And we can utilize that for doing peer analysis so that when that one camera starts acting differently than all the other cameras that are on the front of your building, we'll know when that happens. So let me walk through a quick demo just to show you how that might work inside of Introspect and how the interface is almost exactly the same for managing devices.
All right, so let's walk through the demo on how this might work for a headless device. And back to our dashboard. You see the dashboard, and I was showing you earlier all of my top risk users, but what I can also do is look at my top risk hosts or even IP addresses that don't even have a host name associated to them. And these could be everything from sensors to servers in a rack to devices that don't have a user associated to them, infusion pumps, IP-based SCADA devices. I mean, I've seen just about everything out there. But we treat these just the same. We assign a risk score to them. We look across the kill chain. We try to do as much event correlation as we can to help reduce false positives. So as you might guess, I work with Introspect very similar. I start with my highest risk devices. And if I click on one of these devices, you'll see that it brings me into the Entity 360, just like it did for Michelle Johnson. But up here at the top, it looks a little different. I don't have a user associated to it, but I do have the IP address of the device. I also have the watch list that it's been a part of. You see that, first of all, it's an IoT device, it's a critical asset, and it's also in scope for PCI. And if you look down here at the bottom, you'll see that it also has a risk score that's associated to it that goes up and goes down over time just the same. Now, what I found that's really interesting about headless devices and IoT devices is that they baseline very, very quickly. Human behavior for the most part is stochastic. We do different things every single day. We utilize the network in a different way. But that camera on the front of your building transmits data 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, without fail to that one video server with a fairly predictable port, protocol, amount of data, and so on. And that will baseline extremely quickly with unsupervised machine learning, but it's also very sensitive to changes. So if that camera starts to do something different, so if you look at this device here, it has a risk score of 0 for quite a while. And then all of a sudden, we start to see an excessive amount of host access using the RDP protocol that's coming from that device. So obviously somebody's using it as a jump host now to try to get to the rest of the network, and then we see a very large amount of data going to an external website right afterwards. Now I can take action with this, just like I did with the users. I can investigate the individual alerts. I can look at network traffic. I can quarantine this device. I can tell ClearPass to take it offline. So I can do all of those other things with it, and I can even do that automatically if I need to. It doesn't matter that it's a device compared to a user. And I even have one consolidated list to manage risk across everything, users and devices. So if I go here to my Entity 360 page, what you'll see is that there is a consolidated list of all of my top risk items, period, whether they be a user like Michelle Johnson, Michelle Johnson's PC, or 10.22.3.101, which is number 3 on the list. So I can manage risk at a very, very high level across everything if I need to, or I can simply filter this with a watch list for all of my devices in scope for PCI, or all of my IoT devices, or my critical assets here.
All right, that was really good stuff, Ron. Thanks so much. So Introspect can shed light on many of the dark spots that just continue to make their way into our environment. Very reassuring, if you will. So, All right, moving on now. For the fortunate few organizations that have moved up in their security maturity level, right? No longer reactive, but they actually could do some proactive hunting in here. Maybe stop things before it gets too far down the kill chain. So help us understand, do you provide that functionality?
We do. And the platform contains logs, packets, third-party alerts from your existing infrastructure, so it really is a rich platform for doing proactive threat hunting. And for those of you on the line that aren't familiar with what threat hunting is, it's really an iterative process to find those unknown unknowns. So you may not know exactly what you're looking for when you start out. You may have some ideas on how to start your hunt, maybe with a country-based hunt, or by looking at unusual ports, protocols, or traffic to critical devices. There's been books written about this subject on how to do threat hunting. But the idea there is that you have an iterative platform to where you can ask questions of the data that you've captured, continually refine your questions until you find things of interest and then follow up with them. And Introspect is very well suited to that since we have all of the data from the network. So remember, we have that east-west and north-south traffic. We have the Active Directory logs. We have alerts coming from your existing infrastructure, from your endpoints. So it's a rich platform to do all of it from one location. But enough about me talking about it. Why don't we show a quick demo on how this would work with Introspect. All right, so I'm going to cancel the.
All right, so a quick demo of threat hunting with Introspect. Now, not every shop does threat hunting. A lot of them, in fact, the vast majority of them, don't. These are usually for the organizations that do have the bandwidth to be able to go in, and also the tools to be able to go in and to do that iterative analysis. But for most of our customers, they're perfectly happy with using our 140 plus machine learning analytics out of the box in order to find anomalous things in the network. Now, if you want more information about threat hunting, there's a lot of great SANS courses out there on threat hunting and many books that have been written on the subject. But I'm just going to walk through a quick example here so you can understand how it's done within Introspect. Now, you'll see that I'm on a separate tab within the Introspect interface. I've gone to what we call our conversations. So all of the conversations, all of the logs that we utilize for behavioral analytics are pulled into Introspect so that you have all of those at your fingertips. Now, not only do we pull the logs in, but we also index these so that you'll see over here on the left we have this filters panel which provides a faceted search. So the very first search up here that you have is an application. So we decode about 3,000 different types of applications that are flying across the network. Everything from your standard run-of-the-mill SMB traffic, RDP traffic, down to Facebook live streaming, BitTorrent, Tor. There's not much that we can't decode and see that's happening in the network. And that's all done through deep packet inspection on the individual network traffic. And if the traffic is encrypted, no problem. We still look at the SSL headers, we look at the certificate information, we look at the source, destination, amount of data that was sent in order to do lots of analytics, even on encrypted traffic there. Although if you can't give us an unencrypted stream of traffic, you've got some additional forensic capabilities, which you'll see in a minute. But you have the application, you have all kinds of other fields that have been parsed out of the network stream. We even correlate that down to the user so that you can see the user that it's tied to, and that's done through an Active Directory integration there. And then also we do geolocation on the source and destination so that you get an idea of where it's going to. And those are just a few things that you can do. This is all point and click, so if I just want to see who's using Dropbox or some other type of cloud application, it's one mouse click to filter the traffic. Or if I want to see who's using Facebook today, I can just click on Facebook. This will filter all the traffic for me, show me that Michelle's using Facebook on these IP addresses going to these destinations. It's really that simple. Now, the next level up of sophistication on the threat hunting platform is this search here at the top. And this is where I can get more Splunk-like with my searches. And if you're familiar with things like Elasticsearch, you'll feel right at home here. because I can do some pretty clever things like, let me just find anywhere where the HTTP referrer hops are greater than 1, and there was a file that was transferred as a result of it. And that's actually going through and strafing through the individual sessions in order to find conversations of interest. So I can utilize every field that's in the payload of that data, source, destination, port, protocol, things in the HTTP headers, and utilize those through this search bar up here at the top. And when I'm done with this, I can simply save the query. So if I want to start my hunt with this tomorrow, I can save this query and run it then. Or maybe I just want to be notified when there's some sort of drive-by download attempt that looks like this. So I can create a rule that will take that search and let me customize it for the stage of the kill chain where we see it. I can give it a severity and a confidence level, and this will generate an alert and impact the associated entity score just like our out-of-the-box rules do. So this is a great way to turn a threat hunt into an actionable alert that you can use for all your users and devices. Now, there's also other tools in here to do threat hunting as well, and some of these are, we have our group by, to where I can do sorting and grouping if I want to see, who my top talkers are by users, by port, by protocol, by amount of data sent, and so on. All of this is exportable too, so I can export this data to a PDF if I need to take this and go take it to HR and see who's streaming Netflix more, or what departments are being, utilizing excess amounts of bandwidth. Or what I can do is go over here to my Explorer and get more of a graphical view on what's happening in the network. And this is a great place to start a hunt too, especially if you're just a US-based company, because now I can see that, well, we have a lot of traffic that's going to China and to Russia. You know what? We don't do business in China today. Let me click on China, and you can click on this and instantly start to filter on just the traffic that's going to or from China. I see the user that it's associated to here, so I see a lot of unknown traffic, probably coming from the guest network, which I'm not really concerned about, but I also see that Michelle Johnson here has had some conversations going to China. And if I filter on her, I can go right over to my grid view and see each individual conversation that happened to China. You'll see that it's an HTTP conversation. It looks like some sort of web-based application, QQ Web, with this amount of traffic that was sent and received. And if I really want to get down to the forensics of it, I can click on any one of these conversations, and you'll see the session reconstruction of that. So this is where the power of deep packet inspection and SSL decryption comes into play, because if you can give us a decrypted stream, then you have a lot of information here. This would be invisible with NetFlow and with other types of log-based UEBA solutions. But what this shows me is all that browser traffic. So here's the HTTP request, here's the response that came back with a 200. I even see the URL, I see the user agent, the browser that was used. I even see additional details that I would normally have to go into Wireshark to see, but are all here for my convenience. So this is really unprecedented in helping you to get to the root cause of issues that are out there and avoid that frustrating brick wall of, okay, I see traffic going to China, what is it, and what are they sending, and why are they sending it? So this helps answer those questions. So that's just a quick overview of the threat hunting platform. There's many, many other things that you can do with this, with the searching, the faceted search, and of course the group by and the Explorer. But this will at least give you a taste of what you can do with the platform.
All right. Hey, Ron, that is solid data you guys present. It makes sense. Thank you for that. So next up, I've been hearing a lot about big data, machine learning, all these related solutions. They require significant investment in infrastructure. And with so many clouds, getting more comfortable with moving to the cloud, cloud first, I think these implementations could be challenging. So can you step us through a typical deployment? Do I need to set up racks of equipment, change the way my network is configured, rip and replace, et cetera?
Sure. I can give you some examples here also. Start with what the pieces are in the Introspect solution. So the first thing that we have is, and if you see on the slide here, in the very center, you have what we call our analyzer. This starts as a 2U appliance, but it also runs in the cloud for customers. And what this functions as is a central repository for all of the network data. So all of that data that you saw me going through earlier with the threat hunting interface, all of the logs, all of the risk scores, all of that is stored on this one analyzer appliance. And that starts as a 2RU hardware appliance or runs in the cloud and can scale up with our 1RU scale out to whatever a customer needs from a retention and a throughput standpoint. So there are hardware appliances. I'd say most of our customers deploy with hardware appliances, although cloud is getting more popular lately. The second part of the architecture is what we call our packet processor. And its sole job in life is just to do layer 4 through layer 7 deep packet inspection on network traffic. Now, it's not typically in line with the rest of the network, so it's typically hanging off of a span or a tap or a network packet broker like an Ixia or a Gigamon in order to do its analysis. So it's very non-invasive to the network. You can feed it things like unencrypted data, and we'll give you even more and richer forensics on there. But a usual deployment for a customer will have one central analyzer of one-to-many nodes, and a one or more packet processors. And those packet processors, you can put them in remote locations, and they'll do compression and encryption of the metadata before it's sent back over the WAN to the analyzer. You can use a combination of hardware-based packet processors, which are a 1RU form factor, or VM. So for remote locations that don't have racks of gear that you can put our 1RU hardware appliance into, you can also use a VM and make deployment a little simpler. And you can mix and match those too. For a large deployment, so think for a large multinational corporation, we'll have an analyzer with upwards of 7 nodes in the cluster, and then one or more packet processors spread throughout the world, just depending upon where the ingress and egress points are or remote locations are. You can also do things like bring in NetFlow data, firewall logs, and other types of network telemetry for areas or remote locations, distribution centers, hospitals, where you don't have access to do a full network tap. Not everybody can do that, or they don't want to RSPAN the traffic back to a central location. And for us, that's not a problem. Our analytics don't depend upon that deep packet inspection. It's when it comes to forensics that it's really nice to have that low level of detail. But as I mentioned before, we can deploy the analyzer in the cloud, and that can scale up to whatever a customer needs to. Now, of course, that can get a little expensive for a monthly charge, but for some customers, having the operational expense versus the CapEx is more attractive. Either way, the software works exactly the same. It's going to give them the same capabilities. It's just the only difference is the form factor. All right, did that answer your question, Brian?
Yeah, absolutely. Minimal footprint, flexibility to deploy on-prem and cloud, so that is certainly good stuff. You've got to have that flexibility, so appreciate it. All right, I think we should take this full circle. Help us understand how Introspect is different from all the other solutions that in a space I might argue is oversaturated. So how are you guys different?
Yeah, and I totally agree. I mean, there are a lot of solutions out there. That really speaks to the fact that, and the Verizon data breach really spells it out too, is that are we getting better as an industry at finding bad actors in our networks, or are we getting worse? And we've realized that the previous generation of tools just aren't cutting it for finding behavior. But we're also seeing that customers are really seeing the promise now of machine learning. They've built hundreds of rules to try to find things. They've paid highly paid consultants to come in and to build these rules, but with no real sense of security. Enter machine learning, and this is the one thing that got me excited about coming to originally Niara was the machine learning aspect of it before, because I'd lived this life before and created lots of rules and know that there's just so many gaps there. But with unsupervised machine learning that learns from data, that baselines traffic, there's just really no other way to do behavioral analytics without unsupervised machine learning. How are we different? How are we different than other solutions out there? So let's just walk through a couple of points here You see, the very first thing is that we take the approach that you need both packets and logs. Usually the solutions are divided into one or two camps. You've got the folks that are log-based, that are primarily, and maybe they were acquired by a SIM vendor, but they're log-based, and they're looking at log-based solutions. And yeah, you can find some signals with those, but you're missing a lot. It would be like driving down I-35 with all of the windows blacked out except for the windshield. Yeah, you may get there safely, but there's so much more that's going on that you probably need to know about. And in that case, it's the network. So we combine the network traffic with the logs, and we give equal importance to both of those because we know it's the combination of those that's going to find those attacks that span the kill chain. So that's first and foremost for us, packets and logs. Second is what we do with the data, so the sense-making part of the whole solution. And rules just don't work. Rules are difficult. Scripts, coding, you can't require your customers to have a data scientist on staff or to have somebody that knows how to use Python in order to get value out of the solution. So we packaged up over 100 different supervised and unsupervised machine learning models. These are ready to run out of the box. All of the signals that I showed you earlier in the product are all out of the box. So those things where it detects uploads to new countries, that's all done through unsupervised machine learning. It learns that over time what those behaviors are, even down to the group level, and it does it without any customization or configuration. That's not to say you can't customize and configure it, as you saw from the demo earlier, but you don't have to. So that's the other advantage that we have, is just the amount of prepackaged rules out of the box, where a lot of other vendors you'll have to bring in a team of highly paid consultants in order to build an equivalent amount of functionality. The other thing that we do is we do user correlation across devices. So like myself, when I travel on the road today, I have two laptops. Two laptops. I know it's kind of crazy. An iPad and my mobile device. And I use all of those at different points of the day. And this is common for a lot of folks in corporate America today. They have multiple devices. And if you're not looking across every single device that the user is using and tracing attacks across those devices, you're also missing something important, because the person that takes the data from your SQL database where your customer information is stored and puts it onto their PC-based laptop and then decides to exfiltrate it with their Mac, you may see those as two completely independent operations. What we do is we correlate those users to those devices before our analytics, and we're the only vendor that does that today. And that means that we see those events as being connected and connected to an individual identity, so helping you to link those events together. The other thing that we do is not just with our detection, but with our forensics tools, we have packets and logs in the system. You saw me work with the packets, and you saw me do some rudimentary threat hunting with the packets, but we can also do the same thing with logs and with third-party alerts that come into the system from your existing infrastructure. So all of that's in one platform. I don't have to go chase this down in Wireshark or go back to my SIM or to my domain controller or logs in other systems in order to get the data that I need. It's all in one single platform. You saw from how we handle false positives that it's just a point and click on tuning and training of the system. And that's also very unique to us as well, because back to the point of you don't really want to have to hire a data scientist in your SOC. Training the system on those inevitable exceptions has got to be made easy so that you can reinforce the behaviors that you want to keep, but also let the system know when it's found anomalous things that aren't necessarily malicious. We built this platform on Hadoop and Spark so that we could scale horizontally with relatively inexpensive hardware. So scalability is also one of our differentiators. We have very, very large installations. We can start small with a customer. So if a customer has a small, thousands of devices and need to scale up to hundreds of thousands of devices, we can build a solution for them, and the software works the same. The form factor may be a little different. We may have a few more nodes in the Hadoop cluster for the larger customer, but we have the ability to do that horizontal scaling really easily. It is an open platform, so it's built on open standards. We use Hadoop and Spark and the entire infrastructure to manage those, although it is black boxed from the customer. So you don't need a Hadoop expert on site either. It's all self-healing. It's all black boxed, and you don't even have to touch the Hadoop console at all. And then, of course, this runs in the cloud if the customer wants, or it can run on-prem in a series of hardware appliances or VMs. That answers the question on how we're different. I mean, I'm happy to have a conversation with anyone else that wants to talk about specific differentiators between products that they may be looking at. But that's the high level of how we're different.
Yeah, that was great, Ron. Thank you so much. Yeah, that whole packets and logs, I agree with you completely that we usually see solutions in one camp or the other. So I very much look forward to future discussion, seeing this in action, seeing how it works. Well, thank you for the demos also to reinforce the message, maybe to break up the slideware. I think that's very appreciated. So Mindy, would you like to take us over the finish line?
Great. Thank you so much, both Ron and Brian. That was an awesome presentation, and thank you for those demos. A follow-up email will be sent to you shortly to review today's webinar at any time. So thank you so much. Have a great day.